now.
Yeah, what I wanted
Oh,
to
no.
focus on is the concept of an ordeal, and I'm going to share.
I think I'm going to do video off, but guys, love you so much.
Let me share. Here's the link to the sources. And then I can also share the screen. So if let me share the screen. So Chaim, everybody. In Torah, there's a concept of nisayon, which is a test. And in cultures like indigenous cultures and ancient cultures, there's this concept of an ordeal. And that's the same thing as a test. And usually it's an ordeal that a person puts themselves to the test. In other words, that they bring themselves to a challenge and they overcome the challenge. And it's a reversal of the idea that a challenge happens to you, but instead the person embraces the challenge, meaning that it's there to test what you're made of. And I know these words might sound like cliche, but the formulations in English and in Hebrew are sort of the same. So the idea of getting tested or going through an ordeal or a challenge where you're put to the test to bring out what you're made of, like in a fire being smelted, to see what is in there, is a concept that without a challenge or without a test, you won't know what you're capable of. You won't know what's really inside of you. And the embrace of that test and the embrace of the ordeal is not to see if you can be, if you can make more of yourself than you are, but merely let yourself be tested to see what you're made out of. Not to try to be more than you are, just to see what you're capable of and what can be drawn out of you by embracing the challenge and embracing the ordeal. And so, like in the Parsha, there's a number of different types of ordeals or challenges. Like the Nazir is a challenge that he puts on himself, or the Sota is an ordeal through drinking like a really a harsh liquid, or going through even a test that you bring upon yourself. And then there's the concept of just the tests of life that each soul goes through in this world. Those are there to test them, to see what I'm made out of, and to bring it out of me. I think I'm I don't know if it was, I'm going to misquote it, but I think it was Bob Marley, but I don't know, it may just be a misquote. Is it, you don't know what you're capable of until you're forced to do it, right? Like you don't really know what it is you're capable of doing until you're brought to the point that you need to do it. And then when you need to do it, there it is, and it comes out. There's a concept by the Alter Rebbe, Shneur Zalman of Liadi, which is what his entire Tanya sits on, basically, is the idea that in the end, each person will bring out that if tested and brought to the test, they will do a Kiddush Hashem. They will show up, right? So his idea is, if you understand that if put to the test, you would show your love, why not just show your love right now? Right? Why not just reveal the love right now? Why wait until you're put to the test to prove that you love someone? If in the end you would show your love, just do it now. And the same thing with like what you're capable of. If you're capable of greatness in the time of an ordeal, why not bring yourself to that point and live in the ordeal already? So the main concept of an ordeal, and the person who is sort of the ancestor that most represents the ordeal, and the word that is used for him the most, is Avraham Avinu, Abraham. And the concept there is in the Midrash and in the Torah, there are 10 tests, the 10 tests of Abraham. There's children's books about it. There's Midrashim about it. There's a lot of talks, and there's actually a whole philosophies constructed around the 10 tests of Abraham. But these 10 tests are very old, and they're written into the Torah as the tests that a person goes through. The concept of that is this famous in Torah, the Masa Avot Siman Labanim, that the work or the actions of the ancestors are a sign for the descendants, meaning that the stories of our ancestors, and there's 7 shepherds, and then there's these 3 avot, the 3 ancestors, and then there's these 3 primordial characters, which is Adam and Enoch and Noach. But Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov are called the 3 fathers, the 3 ancestors, and each one of their stories are like a sign for what the descendants will go through. So definitely, there's one way of understanding that where definitely there's one way of understanding that where it's sort of like a ripple that you toss a pebble into the ocean and it sends out ripples. So we're sort of living the challenges of our ancestors physically. So on the most simple way is if your ancestor moved to a certain country, you're living that choice of theirs, right? In a very physical way. Like you have been affected by their choice. When they decided to immigrate to this country instead of to another country, your entire life is now within that ripple. And that's just on the most, like the physical level. The spiritual also is that the wounds and the challenges that they had ripple through families. So if your great-grandfather was challenged by something, it's possible that the son would, and it's possible the grandson would continue through family lines the same sort of challenges. And if it's able to be healed in one generation, then that might set a turn, like a tekufa, a turn for the line, or it might just keep repeating. That's also just even on a psychological level. But there's also a way of understanding of Ma'aseh Avot Siman Labanim, that the actions of the ancestors are is a sign for the descendants, which is that these stories that are, because Abraham, as I once had a friend of mine who said that people say that historical characters don't exist. So he because that's like the point of historians is to go through all of history and prove that most people didn't make it into history, so they don't exist. And then the few people that did make it into history, it's the point of historians to go and prove that they didn't exist either, so then no one has ever existed. But I once had a friend who said in one of his classes, he said that he didn't think that Homer wrote the Odyssey. He thought it was, in class he raised his hand, he said he thinks it was another guy named Homer that wrote it. So that's just, that joke is playing on the fact that really who do we know of the previous generations? Do we know them? But the life of a person, that's even the reality of the person's life. The stories that are recorded in the Torah are very specific. So if those stories of an entire life are chosen to be told, then these stories are the ones that are siman labanim. They're signs for the ancestors, meaning that the point of the fact that these stories made it in and they're being told is for the descendants. It's not for the person who went through the story. It's a sign and a hint for the descendants. So here we have, with Abraham, we have the concept of going through an ordeal, and his entire life are these challenges. And the main essence of an ordeal is this very famous word that Avram says, which is Vehi achara devarim ha'ela, after these things, Ve'elohim nisas Abraham, and the God tested Abraham, meaning that he put Abram to the test and put him through an ordeal. Vayomer elav, and he said on him, Abraham, Vayomer, and he said, Hineni, here I am. That idea that the essence of an ordeal is to say, Hineni, here I am, to show up to it. Not the essence of an ordeal is to win or to not win, but to say, here I am, Hineni, here I am. And as we meet the challenges of life that put us through the fire and put us through challenges, the measure of whether it's an ordeal or not is if the person says, Hineni, here I am. So it's suffering for no reason when the person doesn't say Hineni. But when the person turns around and says, Hineni, here I am, and meets the challenge, then what they're made of shows up. And even if it shows up that I'm not up to the challenge, then good, but here I am. Like, this is the best that I could do under this challenge. And I met it, and this is what, here it is. Here's what it is. Here's what got brought out of me in this challenge. So I think that it's appropriate, especially because when someone goes to receive their mitzvah, the idea of Shavuot is to go up to Har Sinai, to go up to the mountain, receive your Torah, to know your place and know the purpose of what you're meant to do in the world. And that's the idea of receiving your mitzvah, receiving your command, receiving the thing in which you were meant to do in this world. When a person receives that, that's the concept of then being put through. When you know yourself and you know what you need to do, then you're on a path. And when you're on that path and you're being drawn through that, since you have definition now, you're being put through ordeals and through tests. So it says, and everyone can share and comment. In fact, I don't, let me see. Does anyone want to share? You want to read part of that? Well, let me know if anyone wants to. I can read the next one. So, Asara Nisyanos Nisnasa Abraham Avinu. So, with 10 tests 10 ordeals was Abraham tested. Abraham, our father, our ancestor, was tested. Alav Shalom. The Amma Bekulam, and he stood up to all of them. The Hodia Kama Chibaso Shel Abraham Avinu, Alav Shalom, to show how great the love of Abraham, our ancestor, was. So this other aspect of the test is to test the love. Then to go through an ordeal is to see if the person has the love inside, and what is being drawn out is the love. Meaning, if the challenge turns too great and the person succumbs, then that's a measure of the love. And if the person prevails, then that's the love is prevailing. That's the concept behind that ordeal. And part of the reason why the ordeal or the test is something that is like nature connected is because the wilderness is something that sort of by definition puts you through an ordeal. When you go out into the woods, and even if it's close to your house, and just stay there for a night, you are being in a sense tested, even if it's really rather safe and rather pedestrian thing to do, actually, like just go out in your backyard and sleep there that night. You're not really, in many of our cases, under any sort of threat. However, the ordeal is there. The test is there when you're coming to face with the source of your being through this encounter with the wilderness. And the very essence of the wilderness is the essence of going into an ordeal, going into a sort of rewilding yourself and putting yourself through an ordeal is a very nature connected, earth-based, and you find that in cultures that are connected to the natural world, that have wilderness awareness in them. They the concept of meeting a challenge and going through an ordeal is very present in what life means. My life means to go through tests. It's not the purpose of my life is to avoid tests. The purpose of life is to meet the tests. It's like it's something about what the wilderness. I don't know. I can't put better words to it. That's about the best words that I could put to it. But it's something about the wilderness that lets you know that there's nothing wrong with testing yourself. Nothing wrong with embracing that. It's not. It doesn't need to be avoided. You can say, "Hineni, here I am." So there's a number of the 10 tests of Avraham are a concept that is very old, and because there's rather 10 stories about Avraham, and it's very clear, and he's the one who is tested, right? There are many different orders to it, and in this source sheet I'm bringing my order. But they're all there, but some people give different numbers. They count one of them twice and count two of them once, but basically it ends up to be the same stories. It depends on where you put the marker on which one is a test or not. But the first one is the solitude in the cave. So that is an ordeal where Avraham is raised alone in a cave, and this is something that the shepherds in the Torah, almost all of them go through. So Eliyahu Hanavi goes through it, Avram goes through it, Noach goes through it, Shimon Bar Yochai goes through it. Pretty much anyone who's going to have a spiritual connection to the source of their being, to the creator of what is, and to the existence, is going to go first to a cave. And that solitude in the cave is, in a sense, what Hitbodedut is. So Hitbodedut means to go out into nature and to sit alone, to isolate yourself. But the prime example of that is the cave. To go to a cave, to isolate yourself, and not isolate yourself like away from everybody else, but isolate yourself in the natural world. And through that, quieting of man's words and the encounter with just the words of the creator, which is nature, you start to hear the call, hear your voice, understand what it is that you're being called to do in the world. So that's the first test, and Avram finds that when he goes and he comes out of the cave and then he sees the sun, and he says, oh, that must be the source of all life in this world because it's so powerful, it has such a massive effect on everything. Then he sees it sets, And then the moon comes up. So he says, oh, it's not the sun, it's really the moon. The moon is the creator. And then he sees it set, and then he looks at all these different aspects of nature, and he says, each time he thinks, oh, this must be the creator. And then he realizes that each one of them has a flaw to it. And that flaw, that crack, that little hole in them, the fact that they need another thing to exist, hints and shows that there's something behind all of it, something that is bringing all of it into being, that base of existence. And Avram says he actually doesn't, he notices this when he's young, and he knows, oh, what is this great mysterious source of all being? What is all this existence barring its existence from? What is the primary thing here? What is behind this veil of experience? And he goes from that moment all the way till he's 70. Only when he's 70 years old does he hear it first. For those first 70 years, he just knows it's a great mystery. Doesn't actually, he can't hear it talking to him. But to feel the source of being behind all things is represented first by that solitude in the cave. The next sort of ordeal is the trial by fire. And you have this in many cultures, which is in the most simple thing, literally setting up a fire and jumping through it. And that's like the most physical way of doing that. But Avraham goes through that because he gets in the Midrash, he gets thrown into a fiery furnace because he believes in a creator of all things instead of the work of people's hands. So he says the work of people's hands is not the all-encompassing power in this world. There's something behind all of it. And so they throw him into the fire. And you could read the Midrashim about it, but it's Nimrod, the king. He doesn't like Avram because Avram is like talking truth to power. And so he throws him into a furnace, and Avram walks through the fire untouched. So that's a next, both an ordeal in a physical sense and also an ordeal in a metaphysical and a spiritual sense, like going through the fire of your path. The next one is going into gullus, going on, and which is understood also in a lot of cultures is like going on a walkabout, going into exile, going on a wander, meaning that there's the solitude in the cave, and then there's, I have to leave everything behind. I have to walk. I have to find my own way. And that is another ordeal that a person will go through in their life. That means that to be an adult and to be fully myself, I'm going to have to stop being a child, and I'm going to have to walk away. And Avram has to do that, where Hashem says, Lech lecha, go from your land, from your country, and he literally says, from the house of your father, right? Meaning that even you have to leave your family behind. You have to be able to set out on your own and walk your own path. And when you're ready to do that and not to, that's sort of like one of that starts in the beginning of the bar mitzvah, because it's not a full, at least not nowadays, it's not a full walking your own path. You're still very dependent on your family, but it's the beginning of it, the beginning of finding your mitzvah and walking your own path. And that's the third ordeal. The fourth one is learning to survive. And in a physical sense, this is to be put into nature, into the wilderness, and learn your survival skills to know how to survive on your own. Like you walk out there and you need to survive. So to be able to know how to gather food, to be able to build a shelter, to be able to keep yourself warm, all these things that are just intrinsic to a body's need to feel safe in its ability to survive instead of being just solely dependent on something else. That is like the fourth one, which is the survival skills. And Avram goes through it with the famine in the land. So he has to learn how to move around and find food despite the famine. And that's where his ordeal or his test, and that's a siman labanim, that's a sign for the descendants that each one of us need to go through the same thing. Nowadays, in popular discussion around this, it's called pranasa. which is making a living. So it translates in a modern sense. Survival skills means like making a living, and it's an ordeal, right? It's like to make a living is literally. I know that there's a famous quote of the Chazon Ish who said that parnasa is Mesiras Nefesh, right? Like it's saving a life. Like in the same way that in the Torah you have like a lot of the mitzvahs can be loosened in order to save a life. Parnasa is literally like a life-saving, and it is. Survival skills and also earning a living is an ordeal of its own, and it's not, and it is not a light thing. The next test is finding a mate. So Abraham goes through this whole scene where Sarah, his life mate, ends up twice with some other guy. So it's unclear. First she ends up with Paro, and then she ends up with Avimelech. And so it would be some, and also he's not having children. So it's Abraham is tested there to select, to find his soulmate. And you see that his finding his soulmate is a massive struggle for Abraham, because Sarah ends up with two other basically kings, and much more powerful than him, and he has a very strong soul root with Hagar. And Hagar is the woman who gives birth to his first child. And also, according to the Midrash, Keturah, who he marries after Sarah, again, after Sarah dies, according to the Midrash in Jewish tradition, Keturah is just a nickname for Hagar. So after Sarah dies, he goes and he marries Hagar again, and he has 6 more children with her. So really, who is Avram's soulmate? It's very hard for him. He can't really tell, and it's a massive ordeal. But he does stick with Sarah the whole time. 6, fighting for a cause. So the next thing that Avram, and this is an ordeal that each one of the ancestors, that each one of the descendants goes through too, is that he has there's these 4 chiefs which are much more powerful than the other chiefs, and in order to save Lot, Avraham goes to war. He goes to battle. And that is obviously the most quintessential ordeal, which is like going to battle for a cause. But there's the small versus the many, and the weak versus the few. And Avram gets on the side of the small and weak, and he fights the battle against the many in order, or the more powerful, in order to fight for what is right. And each one of his descendants will be put to that test in this model as well. There'll be a time where they'll need to stand up and stand for something, and whether they'll say, "Hineni, here I am." The 7th is to become a parent. So Abraham fathers Ishmael, and the ordeal of becoming a parent. This is not even the raising of the child, but really just the transition and the step and the initiation that a person goes through when they become a parent is a door that not everyone should walk through, and not everyone does walk through. But when one walks through that door, one knows that it is a door that you have walked through. It is an initiation, it is an ordeal, and it is a test that really brings out what you're made out of. And that's what Avram does when he is following Ishmael. The 8th one is enduring physical pain. So many ordeals in cultures that are connected to the wilderness. It's literally just I challenge myself to be able to deal with this physical pain. And Avram does that through the Brit Milah, the circumcision. That is also one of the most obvious forms of ordeal, which is that he puts himself through this ordeal of this physical pain to see what he's made out of. And he stands up with love. The next one is enduring emotional pain. So Avram has to because of what's going on, Avram has to let Hagar and Ishmael go. and he really loves Hagar because he goes and marries her afterwards, and he doesn't actually have an issue with Ishmael. It's Sarah that does. And it says in the commentary right there, and it was bad in, not, I think it's even the Torah, I'm sorry. I don't even think it's the commentary. Avram said, it says it was bad in Avram's eyes. It really hurt him, and he didn't want to do this. But it was something he needed to do, and he did it. And he endured that emotional pain. And the last one, which is 10, which is Akedat Yitzhak, is the concept of letting it go, of giving it up. So with all these things of the challenges that Avram goes through, at this point he just he just has to let go. He just has to give up everything, and that is sort of the final, even in everybody's, pretty much everyone's counts of the 10 ordeals of Avraham is the last one, which is letting it go, of being open. I know there's this book, one of the short stories of Franz Kafka. There's like a short story. He's walking around on the streets of Prague, and he's like talking to you in the short story. He's like, I want to go here, and I want to go there, and blah, 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 blah. And you're listening to it's engaging, whatever. And then all of a sudden, he's like walking down the street, and it's night, and a cop comes up to him and goes, "Give it up." And he goes, he hears it, and it's so deep to him. I can't. Maybe I read it when I was 20, but maybe I'm paraphrasing it. But the words "give it up" are like they resonate into his soul. He doesn't hear it as like just some cop saying "give it up" to him. He hears it as like "give it up, let it go." Right? I guess you could say like a non-attachment. But I don't really think that that's what Akedat Yitzhak. It's really like giving everything up to the source of your being, and not trying to own things, not trying to hold on to things and claw at them and try to make them yours, but let them go. In fact, it says about Akedat Yitzhak that actually the message that he was getting from Hashem was that it was time to let Yitzhak go. He actually, now it was time for Yitzhak to go on his own, and Yitzhak to become his own person, and it was time for Avram to let him go. But Avram was so like religiously fiery that he heard it as let Yitzhak go, like just let him totally go, and he took it that way until the angel was like, "That's not what Hashem is telling you." And you actually see that in the fact that right after that happens, Yitzhak leaves, and then he goes and starts his own thing. He starts his own family, and he goes out on his own, which is really the time where like the cycle restarts again.
Psachyah?
Yeah.
How old is Isaac during the time of the Akedah? I forget. Is he like a late teenager, or is he? Is it unclear?
It seems like it seems like he's young, because it calls him
I know
it seems, because it calls him a nar.
No, that's a youth. Yeah, that's a youth.
Yeah. But actually, according to the Midrash, or it's not really according to the Midrash, if you count it up, he's 37.
Wow. Well, of course, we don't know how to relate to their years, but yeah.
Right.
Or we can take them literally. I don't know.
So, yeah. And then he's, but in a sense, Yitzhak is still a youth, because he hasn't stepped on his own. And a lot of these ordeals, to see what you're made of, is like the ordeals that make for adulthood.
Isn't there also some ambiguity in the word Elah? Like I forget exactly where it comes, and it's in where it is in the Torah. But God tells Abraham, "Rise him up," and he thinks, "Oh, sacrifice! I have to burn him," and it's not clear.
Yeah,
Does he mean like just go up the hill with him, or sacrifice your son? It's just not clear. I don't think that's in the text we have here, but it's another unclear part.
Yeah.
Yeah. Was he telling Abraham, just let him go? You know, you're very attached to him because you've chased off Ishmael. Just let him grow up, let him leave, or let him go sacrifice him. Or
Yeah, I mean that is actually in the story of Yitzhak, that is very central to Yitzhak's life now, is that he's being coddled when he's young, and then when he's old, he's also being coddled. He's like coddled by his wife, and everyone's like being careful with him. He's a very restrained person, but he himself also goes through these ordeals. So he goes out on his own and he digs his own wells and he whatever, but he's not the same. It's not the same thing like Abraham. Abraham really is this character who, it's like the way in which it's using the word love, where it says that Abraham stood up to them and it showed his love. Love in Hebrew is expansiveness. It's not just like love, like I love you. It's going out. It's going out. And strength is being able to receive something, being able to hold back, be able to endure something. That is the words that are connected to strength. In English, it doesn't actually work well that way. Love is sometimes in English the way it sounds like it's like a sort of like more gentle, but definitely the love that Avraham is talking about is this expansiveness. And Avraham is the ancestor who like most represents this expansiveness, this chesed, this love of going out. And each one of these ordeals that a person goes through really is the test of that love, of how much are you going to put yourself out. One meditation in Kabbalah is just the idea is in Hitbonenut, not Hitbodedut. Hitbonenut is the concept of meditating on a certain state of creation. So like there's one state of creation which that if you think about it in a philosophic way, you'll come to it in a philosophic method and you'll be like, really this whole world is just a big gift. It's like free. Right? So really, no matter what happens, it's just an act of love, period. Like it's just an act of reaching out from wherever it's coming from. And so really, the whole world is like, all right, that's when you reach a philosophic method. But the hitbonenut, like that aspect of Jewish meditation, to be mitbonen on something, is that you would meditate on that as if you were in the room of that love. Like you would experience the heichal, like the room of that pure love that the whole world is this love. One of those meditations of hitbonenut is to meditate on your pushing into life, right? Like imagine all of material existence and what occurs. I mean that in the most literal way, like the occurrence of things. Am I going to push into this world or am I going to receive from this world? And both are valid and good. But like if somebody is on a hike and they're hiking up a hill, right? If you want to get up that hill, you're going to have to push into the world. You have to be like like push into it, like put yourself in there and put energy in there and push and go. That's like the pushing in. And then there's the thing where you're basically not pushing into the world at all. You might be moving and walking up the hill also, but you're just there. And the world is pushing into you and you're just receiving it. It's like the opposite. And things are happening and they're affecting you and you're dealing with them, but you're not putting yourself in there. Avraham is not that. Avraham is the guy walking up the hill, leaning into the steps. And when he's leaning into the steps, he doesn't know what his mettle will be proved, what will come out of the ordeal. But he says, Hineni, here I am. He steps into it. He takes the brunt of none of these ordeals that he's dealing with are things that he deals with perfectly, right? I mean, it's not like it doesn't say oh, and Abraham stepped into all of them and he aced them all without without a scratch. No, I mean each one of these are like ridiculously painful scenes. His finding a soulmate is just like unbelievable. With the two other guys and another woman, and it's just and survival skills. It's he's in a famine and enduring physical pain. He's circumcising himself. The emotional pain that he goes through is like having to let Hagar and Ishmael go, and letting go. It's just like his Avram's level of letting go is just beyond the story. Just it's confounding about the level of letting go. So each one of these his ordeals that Avram goes through, each one of us go through this, but Avram is like the person that just he named me. He's like, here I am, and he just pours himself into these ordeals, and it's not that he. It's the same thing with like a walkabout. Like some of us, our exile will be that we go to a national park, and for 3 days we hike out alone and try to understand ourselves. He's leaving the Ur Kasdim, and he's walking out into the land of Canaan with nothing but like the ordeal that he's going through is like epic, and that's why. And I'm not going to go through the other sources. We can end here, but it's in there, and that's why the rest of the sources they each one talks about the epicness of Abraham, of why he becomes what is called Avraham, the father of nations. Like, why should this person be, so much of the world is based off of like this person that did basically these 10 things. That's the story of him, these 10 things. And why should he be such a bottleneck in history? Well, he's just if the stories are just these epic ordeals that he goes through. And in a lot of ways, more than anything, it's the way in which he showed up with love and with his famous Hineni, which is why he's Avraham, why he's the father of nations. So there's another aspect here in the quotes, which is in the Shemona Esrei we call the creator Magen Avram, the shield of Avraham. And the reason for that is because with his great love, you say, who could weather these ordeals, right? Like I could, maybe one of them would be like the culmination of my life, like to weather one of these ordeals. But Avraham is weathering all the 10 ordeals of life in epic proportions. And who is the one that protects him? And that's why we call the creator the Magen Avram in the Shemona Esrei that Jews say, the quintessential 18 blessings. The first one is to address the creator of the world as the Magen Avram, the shield of Avraham. Meaning that who is this? How does Avram survive this? How does he go through these ordeals? And it's because the Hashem is my shield, right? That because Avram has this tremendous love and he shows up with his entirety, then he has this protection to weather and to have this great love drawn out of him. And so I give each one of us bracha that in the ordeals, and a blessing that in the ordeals that each one of us go through. And the ancestral ordeals are the primary and meta ordeals that a person goes through in life. And each one of us go through those same ordeals in our life. And I give us a bracha that we should show up to them with love, and that we should have the shield to protect us, that we should be able to say Hineni and embrace the challenges of our life and not turn away from them, and that we should come out the other side with a lot of self-knowledge. Amen.